First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's presentation. For those who don't know me, my name is Marlene Smith, and I'm the president of Wild Ones Chesapeake Bay. Wild Ones Chesapeake Bay is deeply rooted in native plants, serving Charles, Calvert, St. Mary's, Anne Arundel, and Prince George's County. And before we begin with Barry tonight, I'd like to introduce you to Wild Ones if you're not familiar with Wild Ones. Wild Ones is a national 501c3 charitable organization based in Wisconsin that works to connect people and native plants for a healthy planet. There are currently 96 chapters and 37 seedlings across the United States. And if you're not a Wild Ones member, I encourage you to join your local chapter. In Maryland, there are 5 chapters, including Wild Ones Chesapeake Bay, Wild Ones Delmarva, Wild Ones Greater Baltimore, Wild Ones Greater Frederick, and Wild Ones Nation's Capital. Wild Ones Chesapeake Bay currently has 80 members, which includes 3 businesses and 2 nonprofits. Our mission is to promote native landscapes through education, advocacy, and collaborative action. Our vision is native plants and natural landscapes thriving in every community. We inspire change through shared core values. Respect is at the heart of Wild Ones. We have respect for each other, for nature, and for the earth. We're an inclusive community. Diverse voices and backgrounds make us stronger. That's why we welcome everyone to join us. We provide evidence-based information because the seeds of change spread most efficiently when grounded in data. We monitor and share the latest evidence-informed strategies. We're action and growth oriented. Just dig in. We learn, grow, and share our knowledge. With us tonight to discuss beneficial plant selection, things to consider when making choices, is Barry Stahl. And I'll turn it over to Sue to introduce Barry. But before I do, I just want to make note that we will be putting a survey link in the chat to give us your thoughts on how tonight's presentation went. We appreciate your feedback. It helps us with our future programming. So with that, I'm going to stop my screen share and turn it over to Sue.
And hopefully I will start. All right, now we're ready. All right, I'd like to introduce Barry. Is it Stahl? Well, I've always already called him Barry, so is that how you say your last name?
That's close enough. That's good.
Okay. Barry is a professional horticulturist. He has had a career in public gardens in the DC area. He's a master naturalist, a tree commissioner, a community garden designer, a board member at Chesapeake Natives. And in 2019, he and his wife, Kathy Shollenberger, founded the Wildlife Habitat Program through the Prince George's County Audubon Society. And as I said previously, he's just an all-around good guy with lots of knowledge base. So I'm going to run the slideshow. Barry's going to talk, and he's going to tell me when to hit the next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Barry.
All right. Thank you, Sue. And thank you, Marlene. And appreciate your inviting me to speak. I'm proud to say that I'm a fairly new member, despite all the great credentials that Sue mentioned, member of Wild Ones in the National Capital Region. So that's new for me, and I'm glad to be involved with Wild Ones. I'm making some assumptions when I start, because Wild Ones has sponsored this, because you know me as the president of the board at Chesapeake Natives Nursery, because I'm involved with my wife in co-directing the Wildlife Habitat Program for the Prince George's Audubon Society, that we're going to be talking about native plants, and specifically about which are the best native plants, and about the fact that there are a lot of things to consider about what it means to be best, but we're not going to be talking about whether native plants are better than porcelainberry. We're making an assumption that you know that. We're not even going to be talking about Are azaleas prettier than native plants? Well, maybe they are, maybe they're not, but we're talking about beneficial. And I've titled my talk Beneficial Plants, and that means natives. Okay, Sue, next slide, please. And thank you for that note, Deb. I will try to get in closer and talk louder. So, lots to consider. I've put together a list of a Habitat 100, which is located on the Prince George's Audubon website. So you can look up 100 plants that do well in this area, the Chesapeake watershed, particularly the coastal plain and the Piedmont area. So that's one guide on what's a good list. Those are all the 100 plants that are listed there are all going to do well in this region. Next slide, Sue. But let's look at other ways of going deeper and what are ways to look at what might be the best plants. Well, if we ask Doug Talamay, who's a great mentor for programs like this, if you're not familiar with him, I recommend Nature's Best Hope or Bringing Nature Home. And he'll tell you there that trees are the most important native plants because they host hundreds of caterpillar species. Next. One of the most familiar associations are milkweeds and the monarch caterpillar. They have a special association. And so this is all about relationships. Next slide. So why are caterpillars so important? Well, because caterpillars mean baby bird food. It takes thousands of caterpillars to bring up a small clutch of birds within the space of a few weeks. So parent birds are looking for the plants that host the caterpillars. And they won't find them on a very pretty plant, the Caryopteris, the bluebeard, I think it's called, because it's the host plant for 0 caterpillars, not a native, and therefore not a host plant, but a plant like the wreathed goldenrod, Solidagocasia, or blue stem, hosts 150 different butterflies and moths. And that means lots of caterpillars, and that means the adult birds are going to be going, looking for those plants in their gardens in order to feed the thousands of caterpillars that are needed for their clutch of birds. Next slide. Now, here's another plant, our native black cherry, which a lot of people would say, ooh, that's ugly. Oh, I got to knock that down. I got to clear out that web. But when I look at this, I think that's bird food. How great is that? 390 species of caterpillars hosted by the black cherry. So to my mind, this is a way of turning around our aesthetics, our way of looking at our gardens from something that might be considered ugly, that these might be considered an insect pest. But if you think of the benefits, this might be a choice that you make, and you might choose to leave the caterpillar nests because you recognize how valuable they are to the environment. Next slide. So those are birds feeding their clutch of babies, but then they take off, the kids leave town, you're an empty nest bird, you're looking for taking care of yourself at that point. You've exhausted yourself getting thousands of caterpillars to feed your chicks. Now you want to fatten yourself up. You need berries. Next slide. And the berries that you're going to look for, hopefully, find, are ones like this strawberry bush, the Euonymus americanus. Now, what's different between this Euonymus and the non-native Euonymus? These berries are loaded with fat, they're loaded with protein, and they've co-evolved with the birds so that they can fatten up on them and migrate, or fatten up and overwinter in the cold winters. Whereas the non-native Euonymus berries don't have the same fat content. And unfortunately, they're out there everywhere, and they attract birds, and we want to be able to supply more plants like this that will actually benefit the birds the most. Next slide. Likewise with the grasses. Our native grasses have seed heads that if we garden well and leave them up over the winter time, they'll be feeding birds who overwinter with us all through the winter. Also provide nesting material, also provide shelter for birds. So our native grasses, likewise, that we leave standing in our gardens over the winter are providing enormous benefit. Next. And here's another beneficial plant you might choose to put in your garden. For one thing, it's a beautiful plant. The viburnums are all beautiful. But think in terms of birds trying to escape their prey. They need dense foliage like this in order to be hidden from their predators. So if you want to attract birds, if you want to keep them safe, you'll be planting plants like this maple leaf viburnum. Next slide. So that's all bird stuff. What if you're a pollinator? You're going to be making different choices about which of the plants that you want to see in people's gardens. Next slide. So you'll be looking for plants like Black-Eyed Susan, our Maryland native plant, which supports 29 different bee species. And how you plant them is going to be just as important as which plants you choose, because bees exhaust themselves going from one plant to another, and the closer you can plant them, the denser you can plant them, the more you plant in clusters and masses, the more benefit you're providing to the environment, providing to these pollinators. Next slide. Another example, the New England aster supports 33 different bee species. And these are mostly tiny little native bees. Next slide. And another concept, another way to plant, in addition to which plants to choose, is the concept of continuous bloom. Because insects are emerging continuously throughout the growing season, and they're looking for nectar and pollen on plants all throughout the season. So as one bloom fades, another one should be coming in, because insects are emerging one after the next in series as well, and looking to support themselves all throughout the growing season. Next slide. So you're not a bird, you're not a pollinator, a bee, a wasp, a fly, you're a butterfly, okay? What do you need? What's your best choice? Next slide. Well, you'll be looking for nectar-rich plants and host plants as well, like the wild bee balm and the blue mist flower, which are great butterfly plants. Next slide. So you start seeing kind of a hierarchy here when you're making decisions. We're setting up a framework or a matrix on how to go about making decisions on which plants to include in your garden and which to exclude. Obviously, the exotic invasives are the worst ones to have in your garden, the ones that come in uninvited, the ones that are a lot of work to remove, but are necessary to remove in order to make space for our good natives. But surprisingly, not every native is equal. There are aggressive natives, which if you have all the space in the world, then you can afford to have plenty of pokeberry, you can afford to have cutleaf coneflower, you can afford to have even poison ivy if you have enough space. They're all beneficial to wildlife, but for most of us, we have smaller gardens, and many of the natives are like that are just too aggressive. So we have to deselect them, consider them worst offenders, because they just we don't have enough space for them to be able to have them as well as other plants. They can be called thugs, and they just take over the garden. Now, introductions are plants from Europe and from Asia. And not every one of them is a bad plant, as long as they're not invasive. They're not a bad plant by any means. They're just taking up valuable real estate that native plants could take, and they're not providing the same kind of benefits. Every plant provides benefit of some sort. It sequesters carbon, it collects rainfall, those good things. But the difference is food. Our native plants provide food, whether it's as a larval host plant or whether it's the berries that we were talking about a moment ago. Those are the most beneficial plants for wildlife and for the environment. Now, then there's the category of near natives. Okay, and that depends a lot on how you define them, and it depends a lot on how they're created. Let's say, okay. Now, garden centers like, because they know there's a native plant movement, to call everything within thousands of miles a native. Right? They'll call a California native a native plant. They'll call Mexican feathergrass a North American native. Let's not be fooled. Those are not natives. They're not providing any benefit to the wildlife in our area. So they can call them, the nursery industry, whatever they like, but we're going to outsmart them and get true local natives. And I'll talk about that more in a moment when I talk about Chesapeake natives. Cultivars are another category, and not every cultivar is a bad plant, but most cases they don't provide the same benefit. There's a lot more research that needs to be done. We don't really know if a purple leaf heuchera provides the same benefit to a bee. We don't know if a butterfly will lay its eggs in many cases, or if the chemistry is really different and those adult butterflies do not want their babies to be feeding on those leaves. There's a lot more research that's needed, but we can make some assumptions there too. The straight species we know are going to provide benefit. We know that they've co-evolved with these insects over thousands of years, probably tens of thousands of years, and maybe even longer. So we know that those are beneficial plants, that wildlife is going to thrive on them. With the cultivars, we don't know. Mount Cuba is a great native plant center for research and a beautiful garden in Delaware. They're doing a lot of research on cultivars to see how many pollinators they attract, how much benefit they provide. And they've actually come up with some plots that have some cultivars that outcompete, that do better than some of the straight species. But this is so far seems pretty rare. And here's a big downside for cultivars. Cultivars come about because sometimes through crossbreeding, through hybridizing, but probably more often through selection. You have a whole row of plants in your nursery, and you find one that has special characteristics. Maybe it has brighter flowers. Maybe it has bigger leaves. There's something about it that a nurseryman will say, "Oh, this would make a good plant for the nursery trade." And they're vegetatively propagated. That is to say, they're cloned. The same plant is produced over and over and over again to be released to the nursery trade. So what do we get? We get a lack of diversity. We get plants that are exactly the same, one to the next. And suppose you get a virus in one of those that you put in your garden. It's likely to spread to all the others that are in that garden. Whereas native plants that are grown from the wild, they have resilience against disease. You might lose half of them even, but the other half is going to thrive. That's what they do in the wild. They're resilient to diseases. They're resilient to drought or to flooding. They've naturally evolved on their own in order to thrive. Mm-hmm. So the best ones are called local ecotypes. Those are the ones that are known to be growing locally. At Chesapeake Natives Nursery, they're collected from seed and grown from seed. So they're not the clones that you see many times in a nursery, not the clones that are the cultivars. And then I mentioned Doug Tallamy at the start. His concept is keystones. Among the local ecotypes, those that provide the most benefit are the ones that attract, that host the most caterpillars. Next slide, Sue. So biodiversity is the key. That's what supports all wildlife. So aside from the resilience that I mentioned and the coevolution that plants have evolved with pollinators, it's having a diversity of plant life that makes for a thriving community of plants. And plants that are local have adapted to local conditions. A lot of people complain about their clay soil, but the truth is that that's our native soil. And the native plants that we grow have co-evolved with that native soil. You can actually, too much amendment to your soil actually is not good for native plants. It's designed for these European and Asian plants that we've brought in that need to have an amended soil. But our native plants, they have evolved in our own native clay soil. And what's more, there's no coincidence when insects and flowers appear at the same time. When a columbine opens up in early spring, the cellophane bee is right there to get the nectar. They've been hibernating all winter. They're hungry. They go right for the nectar on a plant that's just opened up its flowers at the same time that they emerge. That's not a coincidence. That's evolution. That's Mother Nature at work. And you'll only have that in a garden that is biodiverse, that is as native plants, local ecotype plants. Next slide. Okay, so all this has been wonderful, talking about birds and butterflies and bees. But what if you're a human? Some of us in this room are, I presume. We have our own needs. Aside from wanting to do good by all these creatures, we have our own set of conditions. When we purchase a house, let's say, it comes with a set of conditions. And we have our own lifestyles. So those are things that need to be addressed when you're considering, well, what's the best plant for me? Next slide. So these are some examples of landscape considerations: sun and shade, damp and dry, wet, erosion, and layers. We'll talk about those one at a time. Next slide, Sue. So hot and sunny conditions, like this hell strip along this between the sidewalk and the street. In the summer months, just hot as can be, dry as can be. There are plants that have adapted to those conditions. Or it might be in your own front lawn, but you just don't have an opportunity to water that much. Next slide. So you need plants like the bee balms, spotted bee balm in this case, the Monarda punctata. Next slide. Or mountain mint, another great one. That's a pollinator magnet hosting hundreds of different pollinators and very well adapted to hot and dry conditions. Next. Maybe you have an area toward the back of your garden, maybe a fence that you want to hide, or you want to use that area for benefit to wildlife. Plants like the giant sunflower or New York ironweed are tall, sun-loving plants. I'm going to Sue next. I'm going to be going quickly through some of these. A lot of people complain about shade. I have shade, they tell me I can't grow anything. Well, the shade can actually be an advantage. Next. You can, if you've got shade, you've got an opportunity to grow wonderful plants like red columbine that I was just talking about, and the cellophane bee. White turtlehead is another. Next slide. Shade plants like the whitewood aster, a beautiful aster that really likes the shade. Wild ginger, and you can see a picture of the little brown jug flower that's there. And another relationship. Seed on that flower has a very rich and tasty seed coating that the ants really love. They gather those seeds, they take them back to their nests, and that spreads ginger all through the forest, all on its own, without our having to intervene. Next. So you can have a beautiful and productive and beneficial garden just by paying attention to the conditions that you've that you've inherited, and working around it rather than trying to fight it, but including beautiful and beneficial shade plants like that. Suppose you have a spot like this. This is a great place for a rain garden. It's not a great place to be planting grass seed over and over and over again and watching it fail each year. So there are lots of, next slide, beneficial plants, plants that are adapted to conditions like that, like the swamp milkweed, like the swamp rose mallow. As their names imply, they grow in wet conditions. So if you've got wet conditions, the best plant for you is going to be a wet condition plant. Next. Or plants like these lobelias, the great blue lobelia and the cardinal flower, also which thrive in moist conditions. Next. And again, rather than fighting and saying, well, I don't have enough flowers in my garden, you can have a beautiful wet garden, rain garden like this, whether it's out in a public space like this or in your own garden. Next. Opposite problem, erosion, dry conditions, or a place where it's really hard to mow. All these are prime for planting plants that are adapted to conditions like this. And there are plants that are for every condition. Next slide. This one should be familiar to Wild Ones. It's very similar to the logo that Wild Ones uses. I've seen on their t-shirts and such. And it demonstrates how deep the roots go on native plants versus non-native plants. Non-native plants have very shallow roots. They don't hold the soil. They're not good for erosion control. Whereas our native species, in many cases, put down really deep roots that'll hold a bank. Next slide. Let's give some examples. Oftentimes, those mean grasses. Our native grasses are the best at erosion control there are, and I think you'll agree the purple lovegrass and other grasses are quite beautiful as well as being beneficial in holding the soil. Next slide. Then a couple of perennials, herbaceous perennials that have deep roots, the hairy beard tongue and the blue false indigo. Those likewise will put down very deep roots that are very good for erosion control. Next slide. You'll also want to consider layers. The best plants for you might be the plants that are missing in your layers. You want to have all layers in your garden in order to be beneficial to all the wildlife. Different birds, different insects, other creatures live in different parts of the canopy, from the tallest canopy down to the ground cover. So the best plant, I would recommend looking through your garden, looking at the layers and seeing which ones are missing, and that's the next best one to add to your garden. Next slide. And that doesn't necessarily mean trees, although we started by saying the best natives are trees. Not everyone has 10 acres like Doug Tallamy and can plant endless numbers of trees, but there are plenty of tall structural plants like this Culver's root and the Joe Pye weed, which can serve a similar function. If you plant this tall Joe Pye weed, you'll find birds landing on them, eating the seeds, looking at roosting sites day in and day out. Next. And then down to the very bottom ground layer, where people oftentimes dare I say, lack imagination and plant liriope and English ivy and think that they need to cover their soil with those invasive plants? No, there are plenty of other choices for good ground cover. Let's see the next slide. Here's just a couple of examples, the blue-eyed grass and the wild strawberry, both beautiful and very functional ground covers. Next. Pussy toes, another beauty, and one that's great for holding the soil, one that's deer resistant, one that's a host to the American painted lady butterfly. So a great addition to any garden. Might be your best choice for the next plant to add to your collection. Next. And then there's one more group of considerations, given that you're human, okay? You've got a budget. You've got a limited amount of time and energy. You've got a specific aesthetic, maybe, about how you want your garden to look. These are all considerations that the bees don't have, but we have as humans. Next slide. So you need to start making choices and going about choosing plants based on what your plans are. Okay. So here's an example of a homeowner who decided, well, I'd like to reduce my lawn. That's where my native plants are going to go. But what's my timeline? How much can I accomplish at one time? So I'm just going to put some cardboard down to smother the lawn area around this tree, around the front of the house. And I'm going to select plants that'll do well in those conditions. And then perhaps the next year I'll expand that out. And then the year after that, we continue on. Next. Or you might feel that you can only do contained gardens, a small patch in front of the house or along the side. But these are beneficial nonetheless if they're planted up with native plants. And again, you're looking at where the sun is, where the shade is, and what the soil is like under those conditions, and choosing plants, your best bets for these spots. Next slide. Even if you have no garden space at all, just containers, just a flower box in front of the house, nonetheless, those can be planted up with native plants and be beneficial to wildlife. This is in Baltimore City. Imagine being a bird that's flying over and they just can't find any green space. They will land in that flower box, believe me, and be very glad to have that as a landing spot. Next. Now, you might be saying, well, it costs a lot of money to plant, and sure enough, plants are expensive, but you can plant just a small section at a time and expand it season by season, year by year, and have a beautiful and beneficial garden before you're done. You can choose plants that divide and spread easily. That can be the thing that drives your consideration, is that you don't have that much money to spend on plants, and there are a number of plants which are easy to divide and spread and fill your garden that way. Work with your neighbors, the swamp plants. You can learn to propagate your own plants, collect the seeds from your plants as you put them in, and grow them on your own in milk jugs. It's often done. And look for sales and special offers as well for ways to manage the costs of a garden. Next. Humans have needs too, like privacy. So the best choice for you might be we only have a few native evergreens, hollies, arborvitae, junipers. Those, if you're concerned about privacy, concerned about screening, those will be the best plants for you to choose. Or if you want to create a small area like this in your garden on the right, to have an enclosed feeling in your garden, then you select plants according to that. And next slide. Ultimately, your plan might well be then to have garden rooms, okay? To divide up a large space, gradually be removing the grass, leaving only what grass you need for either play or for paths or something through. But then the rest of it is a sanctuary for wildlife that you've created room by room just as you might create rooms in your own house and make them serve your purpose. Next. Even if this might not look like a typical garden, and I guess it's not a typical garden, but if you have some area of your garden where you can turn it into a natural play area for yourself or for kids. And the best plants are the trees because they give us what some people call leaf litter or debris, but it's really a gift from our trees. Drop the leaves where they are, drop the insects where they are, and leave them. And that's a garden of a different sort. And I see questions coming up. I'll take them after. So looking at your the space that you have and deciding how you use that space is going to help determine which of the plants that you select. How much lawn do you use? Whether be it for socializing, be it for kids' play areas and the like. You leave just enough, and the rest you can turn over into native garden beds or places for veggies. There's no reason not to have them. So let's look at the next slides. And people often ask, well, if I'm going to do an all native garden, does that mean I can't grow veggies? Well, no, we're not the native garden police. We don't say that you have to have all natives. 70% is a good number to shoot for because that's what the birds are looking for, a place to build their nests where they have plenty of plants available. Next slide. But there's plenty of reason to have vegetable gardens and native plants in harmony. You have a much better yield, much better vegetables if you have native plants planted right alongside them. And you have no need to use pesticides because you're attracting beneficial insects to your garden. Next slide. And vegetable gardens can be beautiful too, especially when they're integrated with native plants like in this garden. Next. So just to wrap things up, a garden can look like this, where it's providing a benefit to wildlife. No trouble finding those plants, no trouble for the bees going from one plant to the next in clusters. No need for a plant zoo where the pollinators have to hunt for plants here and there. And it reflects the homeowner's amount of time and energy and budget that they want to put into the garden. Next slide. By contrast, you might have a different lifestyle, might have different aesthetic choices. Native plants can be used in a traditional kind of setting like this, but they're the foundation plants rather than European and Asian plants, and likewise providing plenty of benefit to wildlife. Next. So if you're thinking from the bird's eye view or the bug's eye view, you're going to be looking at a garden like this that's before and thinking, well, this is what I would be looking for if I was a bee, and turning your garden into something like that. Next. So everybody who's listening to this show, who's watching these slides, can make a difference. That's the beauty of this kind of movement. You don't have to ask anybody's permission. You don't have to have legislation. If you've got a piece of property, even a container, you can be the change. You can make a difference. You can attract wildlife and benefit them. Next slide. And just think in terms of how much, if you look up and down most streets and you see nothing but grass lawns, and you see this one, this says, to me at least, this is thriving. This is vitality. This is what life is all about. And so lastly, I'd say all these plants that you're looking at are available at Chesapeake Natives Nursery. If you're not familiar with it, it's in Upper Marlboro. I would encourage you to visit. I would encourage you to look for open houses there, to go there and shop and visit and talk to the staff and learn more about plants that way. I would encourage you to donate because there aren't many places like this around, and they're a nonprofit, and we need organizations like it. And there is the opportunity, as Sue said, to volunteer there too. It's a volunteer-led organization, and volunteers are always needed. So thank you so much for listening, for having me here today.
Well, we are at the end of our time. I would like to thank Barry once again